Hello, hello. Welcome back, friends. It is February 6th, 2019, and this is the A-Side Live Chat Podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope all you guys out there are having a wonderful little start to your week. We have a ton to discuss today. Y'all brought it with the questions today. We have a plethora of green questions, so let's not waste any more time. I am joined today, as always, by my co-host, the hardest working man in the business, the California King himself, Marc Raimondi. What's up, man? How are things?
Cold here in Los Angeles, Shaun. It's freezing cold. I'm wearing a sweater. I actually wore a beanie outside to walk the dogs this morning. This is no good. It's no good for anybody.
What does freezing cold in California mean? Because it's Arizona. I'm in Arizona, and it is perfect outside, so I don't know if I believe you.
It's in the 40s right now in LA. It was in the 30s last night, overnight.
Man,
why are you laughing?
Because you got people across the country in like negative degree weather. You're complaining about 40 degrees. You're a New York guy, man. You should be able to handle this.
Look, they chose to live wherever they live, and that's fine. I chose to live in Los Angeles where it's supposed to be warm, and it's not warm. It's false advertising.
Look at you. You're such
fraudulent.
You're such a LA guy now, man. You have betrayed your roots.
Freaking sweater. When have you seen me wear a sweater on the show? I only own like 4 sweaters.
Well, there is certainly no shortage of things for us to talk about this week. I mean,
coldest in 20 years in LA this week.
Literally no one in the world feels any sympathy for you right now.
I don't think that's true. I think there
zero people feel sympathy for you. Well, hey, we got a ton to discuss. UFC Fortaleza was a wild and action-packed night, and now we have UFC 234 just staring us right in the face. We'll get to all of that today and more. But as we always say, this is your guys' show. So whatever you want us to talk about, we will talk about. You can ask us on the question on the MMA fighting page below. Any question that gets 3 recommendations, those will turn green and get priority. Or you can ask us a question on the Twitter machine using the hashtags the A-Side and chat rappers. Replay of the show is coming up immediately following it on YouTube. Also, you know the goods: iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, SoundCloud, Stitcher, wherever else you get your pods. And with that, Marc, let's do this damn thing. We got so much to discuss. Let's jump right into it on the MMA fighting page. And first up is coming from M. Haydock 06. Wants to know about an interim lightweight title fight. Hello, Shaun and Marc. Hope you are well. Thank you. It is always so nice to start first question with a pleasantry like that.
I've been better, M. Haydock. Thanks for asking, though.
You're just a cold boy. Do you think that the UFC will book
more ways than one, my friend? In more ways than one.
Do you think the UFC will book an interim title fight given Khabib's lengthy and self-prolonged absence for the next 8 months? If so, who would be the likely contenders? Who would you book if you were in charge? And can you see the UFC making any kind of title fight without Conor McGregor being involved? Would this be the perfect opportunity to bring Nate Diaz back in and give him the Tony Ferguson fight? Thanks. Love the show. Thank you so much for that, M. Haydock. You asked about 4 questions in there, but just generally, Marc, lightweight interim title fight. When you gaze ahead into your crystal ball and you see the rest of 2018, we talked about this a little bit last week, but what do you see? Do you feel like an interim title fight is inevitable at this point?
Probably. I mean, unless they just outright strip Khabib, which I don't necessarily see happening. I think that in most cases, we've discussed this, Shaun. We don't like the interim title. We're not big interim title fans here on the A side. But in a case like this, where Khabib has made it known, if that does continue and he sees this through, that he won't fight until November at the very earliest, that will be more than a year until since he's defended the belt. Of course, he defended it against McGregor in October 2018. In that case, okay, I'm on board with an interim title. The question is, who would you give it to? And M. Haydock is asking about Nate Diaz. And man, could you imagine if the UFC gives Nate Diaz that interim title fight? Dustin Poirier would take his phone and throw it against the wall. Could you imagine how furious Dustin Poirier would be if that were to happen?
Justified.
I'm not saying it won't happen, because look, this is the UFC and UFC gonna UFC. But if that were to happen, Poirier would be furious, and I believe rightfully so. I think that if I had the choice today, whatever date it is, what date it is today, I don't even care. It doesn't matter. If I had the choice today, Tony Ferguson versus Dustin Poirier for the interim lightweight title makes a whole lot of sense to me if I were the matchmaker.
It makes a whole lot of sense, but I go back to what I said last week or maybe 2 weeks ago, where it's just, if you're Tony Ferguson, how can you even begin to believe the UFC if they're doing this again to you? This would be the second time now.
It doesn't matter. I know you made this argument.
It does. I mean, it does matter to some degree, man. He is the obvious guy. He is the obvious. If we're throwing somebody into a title fight, it's Tony Ferguson. If you're Tony Ferguson, you've already gone down this road with the Kevin Lee fight and then getting the belt stripped from you because you got hurt doing a required media tour. How do you go down this road again? How do you believe the UFC when they tell you, yeah, no, this interim title fight means, this interim belt means that you'll be the champion or you'll fight the champion next? I have no idea how you were able to get that guy on board, other than the fact that maybe at some point soon he will need a paycheck, because obviously we haven't seen him for a little bit. But man,
that's it, right? I mean, what's the alternative for Tony Ferguson? They say interim title shot, Tony against Dustin Poirier, and he says no. And they say, okay, Dustin Poirier versus Nate Diaz for the interim title, or Ally Quinto or Justin Gaethje or whoever I'm forgetting in the division, and Tony Ferguson is left in the lurch. So there really is no option. It's the UFC's way or the highway in many cases, unless you have an incredible amount of leverage, which only some fighters, a handful of fighters in the history of the organization have ever had. So I get what you're saying, and I don't blame Tony Ferguson if he told the UFC to screw off about an interim title, but options are limited. That might be it.
That's fair, and you're not wrong. And I go back to, really, man, it is just a shame. It's a complete shame where this division is at this point, because it is such a great division. It's the best division in the entire sport, and it is so backlogged at this point for the last 3 years that none of this, no outcome would actually make the amount of sense that it should. Like the fight that we need is Tony versus Khabib, and we need that fight as soon as possible. And who knows when we'll get it? I mean, like I said, what's that?
We may never get it.
We may never get it. And like I said, I think it was last week, I know Khabib has said, or his manager has said, that he's not going to fight until, Zubaira, his suspension is up in 9 months. I've been told by sources that may not be as hard and fast as it seemingly appeared, that may have been more out of emotion than anything, and they might be willing to work with the UFC, but who knows? Even still, you have Khabib out here now saying that he didn't screw doing a PSA for Las Vegas. Las Vegas is a place full of prostitution and gambling and drinking. How can I do an anti-bullying PSA for them? The whole thing is just a mess, man. I just wish we could get it figured out. I don't know. I don't have the answer. I know we hate interim titles, but it feels as though Tony versus Dustin is probably the only real answer that we can get, but that's just unfortunate that we're even in this situation.
The lightweight division is the best division in the UFC, and it's arguably the deepest division that the UFC has ever seen right now, especially at the top. And it just could not be any more muddy. It's just it's a mess. It's a total mess. And the whole stuff with Khabib and taking shots in Nevada. I mean, if you want to take shots in Nevada for that, fine. That's okay. I don't blame him. We talked about it. That was a very, very large $500K fine. The PSA, it's silly, but that's what he agreed to. He agreed that was the adjudication agreement. That wasn't the commissioners acting unilaterally and voting on something themselves. That was something that Khabib's team agreed to. So which is it? Are you gonna do it and that's the deal, or that's not the deal? I mean, I don't get the backlash. And I mean, drugs, gambling, prostitution. I mean, that's Las Vegas. That's where the UFC does the majority of their fights. That's where the UFC is based. It's a Las Vegas based company. So he's had no problem fighting in Las Vegas in the past, but now he's taking shots at them for, morals, while also hanging out with people like Ramzan Kadyrov. Strikes a little bit hypocritical to me.
No, yeah, that's a perfect point. That's a perfect point. And I think last thing to say on this is, if he doesn't do the PSA, that suspension is 9 months. He's out 9 months if he doesn't do that. It's a 6-month suspension if he does it. So we'll see, man. I said it before.
Care about, because if he's not going to fight until November anyway, then he doesn't care. He doesn't have to do the PSA, because that's more than 9 months away. So that's another thing.
Yeah. Well, hey, let's keep it moving here on the A side. Next up's coming from Abdul Rif on the MMA Fighting page. He wants to know about UFC not communicating with their fighters once again. And this is a familiar conversation, Mark. This is a long-standing issue that we have talked about a lot. So recently, he writes, we found out Holly Holm is not fighting Aspen Ladd anymore. It surprised a lot of people, including Aspen Ladd, who found out on social media. And this is just one of those examples. We recently had Joanna Jacek finding out the news of social media when she was out of the Valentina fight. And then Eubanks finding out that she's out of the fight after that. So what do you make of this recent phenomenon? I would say it's not that recent, which has been going on for a while, to not inform fighters. Like, I don't understand, even if you don't have the guts to call someone, at least send them a text message or email. Kind of going a little train of thought there, but I get you. Have you guys any idea why they do? It comes over very amateurish. He kind of fell apart there at the end, but I generally understand where you're coming from.
We're doing so well, Abdel.
But yeah, man, this is another interesting case. One we've seen long before. Basically, we found out at the UFC 235 press conference that Holly Holm versus Aspen Ladd is not on. And the funny thing is, that fight was never on. MMA Fighting did not report that fight was on, and there was a reason that MMA Fighting did not report that fight was on, because it was never actually on. It was another one of these examples of Dana White says that this fight is.
Don't worry over there.
Don't worry about that. It was another example of Dana White said.
Your dog, right?
No. Dana White says that this fight is going to happen when nothing has actually been settled. No deals have been made. Things are still in negotiations. And it's frustrating, man. It's frustrating as members of the media who have to sort of navigate these waters. It's frustrating, I'm sure, for fighters and managers who get their business thrown out in public. I don't know. What was your takeaway from, I guess, the latest in a long line of these type of instances where fighters are finding out through either us or social media or wherever that things that personally affect them are happening?
I mean, this has happened so many times. I mean, there are too many times to list. I can't even remember all the times that it's happened, but it's happened, I feel like, weekly in this sport for the last few years. And that's just how it goes, unfortunately. The whole thing with Holly Holm and Aspen Ladd, and I'm not 100% sure what the backdoor machinations and the behind the scenes stuff was, but I know that when that fight was first reported, I think it was in December, right? I reached out to Holly Holm's manager, Lenny Fresquez, and he told me that they were not going to decide on anything. Nothing was going to be official until after the Cyborg Nunes fight. That's what he told me. So at that point, Holly Holm had not, maybe they agreed in principle, but nothing was going to be a done deal until Cyborg Nunes was done, because that fight had a big effect and had a big effect on Holly Holm's career. You can't really make plans until that fight plays out. So as we know, Amanda Nunes won that fight. That might have changed some things because Cyborg was the favorite, and that could cause a little bit of a domino effect in two divisions, featherweight and bantamweight. And as far as I know, I think that Holm's team was set on the Ladd fight happening. I don't know if Holly Holm actually ever signed a bout agreement. It seems like Aspen Ladd did, but I'm not sure if Holly Holm ever did. And when Dana White said that last week at the press conference, I texted Lenny Fresquez, Holm's manager, immediately and said, hey, Dana White is saying this at the press conference. And he replied, news to me, which was the exact same thing that Aspen Ladd said. So it wasn't a matter of Holly Holm's team saying, we're not taking this fight. I think they thought the fight was going to happen too. And this is just where we're at now. And now we're going to move on. Now, if we're talking about specifics, and I wholeheartedly agree that fighters should know this stuff before it gets reported in the press, before Dana White says it at a press conference or tells a media member in a scrum or what have you. This fight in particular, I'm okay with it not happening. As good as the fight would have been, and I think it would have been a very good fight, I think that where we're at with both divisions right now, Amanda Nunes needs a contender at 135. If they're not going to do Cyborg versus Nunes 2 right away, which I would prefer personally, I think that should happen. It should be the main event, I think, of Curitiba in May, the stadium show. I think that's a huge fight. But if they're not going to do that, Nunes needs someone at 135, and who better than Holly Holm? I think Holly Holm is probably the top contender in that division. I know that her record over the last few fights is not the greatest, but if you're talking about drawing power and legitimate wins on their resume, I think Holly Holm is the person for Nunes, and it's a really interesting style matchup. So if they're gonna go in that direction, if they're gonna cancel that Holm Ladd fight for that reason, because Holm is next in line for the title. I'm okay with that. I just wish that there would have been a little bit more communication with both sides.
Yeah, I agree with you on a couple points there. I think that ultimately I'm okay with the fight not going through, the Aspen Ladd versus Holly Holm, because really Holly Holm is sort of the last challenge out there for Amanda Nunes. Obviously, there are a lot more contenders in the wings, but if Amanda Nunes beats Holly Holm, she has effectively beaten every single woman that held the title at either 45 or 35.
Mm-hmm.
At that point, I mean, that's an incredible resume. She's already talking about walking off into the sunset. You can walk off into the sunset with an impeccable, unassailable resume at that point if you take off, or if you knock off Holly Holm from sort of that pantheon as well. But yeah, man, going back to the question at hand, I don't know. I don't know what the answer is. I don't know why they do this. I don't know why this has so consistently been a thing throughout the past 5-8 years in the UFC. It's endlessly frustrating for all people involved. I know you've probably talked to managers about it. I've talked to managers about it. It's just a thing that they do there. There's no concern, I guess, to notify parties before they put things out in the public. It's just one of the ways they operate. It's endlessly frustrating. I'll say that.
Yeah, no doubt. Let's move on. Another one from M. Haydock. How about this? He's on a roll. Israel Adesanya. Do you get the feeling?
Here we go. Here we go.
This is where it's at. This is the sweet spot this week. Israel Adesanya. Do you get the feeling that something special is going to happen for Israel Adesanya on Saturday? The scalp of Anderson Silva, especially if he were to do it in spectacular fashion, would be another major boost for him and could give him more momentum on his title path. If he was to win in an emphatic manner, do you think he deserves the next title shot? Or do you feel that his run of Wilkinson, Vettori, Tavares, Brunson, and Silva is short of what it would take to challenge? For instance, Gastelum has beaten Kennedy, Belfort, Bisping, and Jacare, two former UFC champions and former Strikeforce champion and former Strikeforce champ contender. So let me just say one thing before I kick it to you. It's an awful lot of assumptions about Israel Adesanya versus Anderson Silva, and deserving a title shot. We don't like to use the word deserve on the A side because there's no such thing in MMA. You don't get what you deserve. So, Shaun, to you, what do you think? Silva loses. I can't even, like, those words don't even go together in my mouth. It just doesn't work. Adesanya beats Silva in spectacular fashion. Does he get the next middleweight title shot?
I think so. A lot of words have been said on this program over the past couple months over this fight. So it's funny that now we're finally here. I think it's obvious, and I don't know that it's probably inarguable that this is a number one contender fight for both sides. I think no matter who wins, the UFC has already promised Anderson Silva a title shot if he wins. Who knows what that even means at this point, but he is Anderson Silva. I don't feel like they would go back on that. Israel Adesanya, it is obvious that they have picked.
They don't care who it is. They would go back on anything.
I don't know. I feel like that was the only reason Anderson Silva took this fight. There's no way that they would go back on it for him if he managed to pull off what would really be a stunning upset at this point. But on the other side of this, Israel Adesanya, it is obvious that they have pinpointed him as sort of a potential star, and that this is their step to give him that shot, to give him that legendarily named scalp on his path to the title. So it is a number one contender fight in my mind, and I think in both fighters' minds, and just generally the UFC's mind. Man, I just don't want to see it. I know I'm not saying anything. I'm not saying anything new, but I just am not looking forward to this fight, man. I am not looking forward to this weekend when it comes to this fight. It's going to be. I have a terrible feeling that it's going to be either. I just have a terrible feeling that it's going to be a very bad night for Anderson Silva. I mean, maybe not though, man. This is also a guy who at 43 years old, as you've said for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks, at 43 years old, he is a legend in the sport still. In his prime, he was considered a wizard. We thought he was a guy who could do anything. He transcended what was possible in this sport. Maybe he still has one old moment left in him, man, but he is the biggest underdog that he has been in the entirety of his entire career, except for like the brief moment when he stepped in to fight Daniel Cormier at UFC 200. The opening odds for that were a little higher than this, but right now he is just an overwhelming underdog, and I do not see good things coming for him.
So let's say Israel Adesanya catches lightning in a bottle and pulls off a miracle by knocking out Anderson Silva. Biggest upset in UFC history if it were to happen. Let's say that does happen. Would Israel Adesanya get a title shot? Why are you laughing?
The biggest upset in UFC history.
Yeah.
If the overwhelming favorite wins on Saturday, it's the biggest upset in UFC.
Who's the overwhelming favorite? Anderson.
Continue, please.
What? So if Adesanya pulls off one of the greatest upsets in the history of sports at UFC 234.
You can't even do this with a straight face.
Oh, God. Okay, so if Adesanya wins, if Adesanya beats Silva, which many expect him to do, does he get the title shot? Yeah, of course. I mean, this is what this is for, right? This is why that fight was slotted as the co-main event on this card with Whittaker and Gastelum as the main event. It's in Australia. Adesanya is from New Zealand. This is why that fight is positioned where it is, because the winner, whoever it may be, will get the title shot next. And I don't buy into the whole deserving thing. And people are saying, oh, he's got to fight a top wrestler. I mean, Brunson is a good wrestler, but none of that really matters, honestly. It's not about who deserves what. It's never been about that. I don't know why we keep saying that. And I'm guilty of that too sometimes, saying, and we'll probably talk about it later with Marlon Moraes about who deserves what. That's not about that. It's about who can make the UFC the most amount of money as a contender. And I think that Israel Adesanya or Anderson Silva, I think he's still a draw. I think that one of those guys is the next fight for Whittaker or Gastelum because of that. It is a promotion. It is not a sports league. It's called a promotion for a reason, because they're trying to make the most possible money on these cards. And Adesanya is I think, their next golden boy. I think he's their next big star. Maybe not at the height of a McGregor or a Rousey or a Brock Lesnar, but I think he's a guy that they've kind of put the rocket pack to, and for good reason. I mean, he's got all the things you'd want in a star. He's a dazzling striker. He's got amazing charisma. He knocked people out. So yeah, to make a very long-winded story short, Adesanya, it's his title shot if he wins. I don't think there's any doubt about it.
Let me ask you a question, Mark, because you
sure, Shaun. Sure.
I'm getting crazy echo coming from your side. I don't know.
Yeah?
Yeah. Let me ask you, Mark, because you spoke to Anderson Silva. You went to his gym. I don't know. I think that was 2 weeks ago at this point. The Spider Kick gym out in LA. I wonder, when you're Anderson Silva, when you're this guy who his entire career, people have lauded him as, like I said, somebody extraordinary, somebody who defied what is possible, someone who reinvented really the physics of this game and what people are capable of doing in that octagon. When you've gone your whole career being that guy, do you think he understands what the UFC is actively trying to do here? Because it's obvious at this point, I would say for most people, that this is just one of the typical things that we see throughout the history of the fight game, where you feed the young or the old lion to the young, and especially in this way where Israel is sort of considered the new Anderson Silva, that type of thing. Do you feel like Anderson has even is somebody that preternaturally competitive, someone that has been so successful throughout their life? Do you think he even kind of thinks about that, even a little bit, of just like, it's pretty obvious that the UFC wants me to lose here, that the UFC is preparing for me to lose here, that the UFC is setting me up to lose here?
I think he knows what this is. I mean, he's not a dumb man. I think he sees this for what it is. But on his end, it's a high profile fight. It's in a co-main event. He gets to go to Australia and swim with the sharks, like he said in his scrum at his gym a few weeks ago. And I'm sure the money is good. I'm sure the money is right. And he's saying that he was guaranteed a title shot if he wins. So for all those reasons, you take the fight. And if you're Anderson Silva and you're gonna continue to do this, if you're gonna continue on with your career, and you take the fights that you think make sense, and you take the fights that they're offering you. Now, I know there's a segment of the population of MMA fans who would rather see Anderson take fun fights right now and not take fights against top 5 opponents in the middleweight division. And I completely see where they're coming from.
Raising my hand. That's me. Raising my hand right now. That's me.
Yeah, I mean, I'm completely fine with that. Like, I would watch Anderson Silva versus Nick Diaz again. I would watch that rematch. I would watch Anderson Silva versus like a Shogun Rua, someone like that at 205. I mean, there are fights like that for Anderson, but this is an opportunity, and he's taking it. This is what the UFC wanted to do. This is what Adesanya wanted, I guess. I mean, actually, really, I think it's more what the UFC wanted. Even Adesanya said after UFC 230 that he didn't want to fight Anderson, but in many ways, there's a cool storyline here. Adesanya is a guy who's looked up to Anderson. He's kind of patterned his MMA game after him in some ways. It is kind of like Adesanya is kind of like Silva 2.0, Spider 2.0 in some ways. And I think that there is that narrative there that that was attracted to the UFC, and I think Anderson is okay with it. And also, if you lose to Israel Adesanya here, if you're Anderson Silva, all jokes aside, as you said, Adesanya is the big favorite. So in many ways, Silva has nothing to lose. If you lose this fight, you're supposed to lose. You come out of it, you're still Anderson Silva, and you can still get a big fun fight, possibly in Curitiba if he doesn't take too much damage. Now Curitiba is still a few months away, the big stadium show. So I think if you're Anderson, there's not a whole lot to lose. There's a lot to gain financially and otherwise. So I think that he knows what's going on, but I think he did it anyway.
I don't know, man. I just can't get over it. I guess my last question before we move on from this.
How's my echo, by the way? Is it okay now?
It's doing good now. Everything's good now.
Okay.
I don't know if that was just on my side, but working through it. Live show, like always.
That's right.
My last thing I wonder about with this fight. Say things do go poorly. Say things go very poorly, and Anderson is badly hurt on Saturday, which would be tough to watch. Do you think there is even a modicum of a chance that this is the last time we see Anderson Silva?
I mean, there's always a chance, right? There's always a chance that it could be the last one if it goes as poorly as you seem to think, Shaun. You're not a believer in the Spider. It could be. It could be. I don't think it will be. I think it's a low chance. I think he will fight again. Look, I mean, Anderson is in a position where he has made a lot of money in his career, but he also has a lot of kids, and they need to go to college. A lot of them, they're that age. I'm being honest. He's got a lot of kids.
No, that's a good point.
He has, and also and a lot of this is probably about this fight as well. He has businesses that he wants to promote, like the Spider Kick Gym, which it's no secret that there were 2 media days at his gym leading up to this fight, which is not typical for UFC fighters, where they're holding multiple media days leading up to a fight in their own gym. So he's trying to promote stuff, and as long as he continues fighting, he can do that. And he's on the World's Best or whatever that show is that came on after the Super Bowl on Sunday. He's on that show too, so it keeps him in the public eye. It keeps his businesses going, helps him promote it. So I think for those reasons, there's incentive financially for him to stick around for a bit.
Yeah. Well, hey, let's make the pick, man. No, there's no secret where I'm going. I think Israel's going to win this. What about you?
Wow, man. You know what? It's
you got to ride or die with this, man. You got to commit to this.
We've been talking about this fight since November, man. And I mean, everyone, it's a running joke now, of course. Everyone knows how I feel about Anderson Silva.
He's one of the guys against him. Do not dare pick against him after all.
He's one of the guys that, I feel like I grew up watching in some ways. And he was the guy that made me a bigger fan of the sport. The things that it's so hard. It's so hard, man. I was in Philadelphia as a fan when he knocked out Forrest Griffin, and that was like almost like a life altering moment for me to see that kind of physical excellence and domination over another person. I mean, I can't get over that to this day, being there for that card.
All I'm hearing is a lot of waffling. I'm hearing a lot of waffling.
So yeah, I'm picking Anderson Silva by first round knockout, baby.
There you go.
Spider back in Melbourne, UFC 234. Silva over Adesanya gets the next middleweight title shot.
There we go.
The Spider.
All right, way to go for it, Marc. Let's keep the train rolling with UFC 234. The next question is coming up on the MMA Fighting page from JStore, who has a valid point. He asks, is UFC 234 strong enough to be sold as a pay-per-view? I'm excited for the main event and the co-main event, he writes, has a fascination factor. But there aren't many big names on the rest of the card. As far as I can tell, the entire card only has 3 top 10 fighters, all fighting in the main or co-main. Is this card truly shallow, or am I looking at it wrong? And if it is, when is the last pay-per-view that this lacking in depth? Did last week's ESPN card beat 234 in terms of name recognition and ranking quality? And he asked an interesting question, man, because I hadn't really, I mean, the events come so fast and furious. I hadn't really looked up and down this card until this week. It's pretty dry, man. There's not a lot there to sink your teeth into. It is basically a 2-fight card. So what do you think? What do you think about his question?
I think he makes some good points. I think that it's a very shallow card. It is indeed. It's a 2-fight card, and those 2 fights are very good. Don't get me wrong. Those 2 fights are very good. There's one thing that we talked about, and Dave Meltzer, who is like the pay-per-view buy rate ratings guru, always says is that the buy rate for these cards, the pay-per-view draw for these cards is always the main event. It's almost never the undercard. You almost never make a decision as a fan by how deep the card is. It's almost always by what the main event is.
Even the co-main event doesn't matter to some degree.
So to some degree, I think in this case, the co-main event does.
Yeah, I agree. I
think it's a really good supplement. And I also say this, in Melbourne at Rod Laver Arena, that fight sold out in minutes. I mean, those tickets flew off the shelf very quickly. So there is something to be said about that. There is definitely an interest level in Melbourne, in the host city, whether that be for Whittaker or Adesanya, or for both, for Anderson Silva perhaps. But I do think it's a very shallow card, but it's not, I don't think it's like completely egregious, because I like the top 2 fights a lot. Now, could you make the argument that UFC Brooklyn was a better card than this? Yeah, it was. UFC Brooklyn was a better overall card than UFC 234, and it was on a streaming service. UFC Fortaleza was probably deeper in some ways, but didn't have the I guess cachet at the top that UFC 234 has. But it depends on what kind of fan you are. If you're a fan that buys pay-per-views for the amount of good fights on them and the amount of names and ranked fighters, then this may not be the fight card for you. But if you're like most fans and you go by who the big names are on the card, what the top 2 fights look like, what the top fight looks like, Whittaker Gastelum, there's no way that's a boring fight. That's going to be a fantastic fight. Anderson Silva versus Adesanya, that's a really fascinating fight. So I think it'll do okay. It's not going to look. We're not breaking any records on Saturday, or I guess Sunday in Australia, but it's one of those fight cards that I think some people may choose to not buy. It'll probably get like in the 200,000 range, maybe 150. I mean, which is, I guess, on the lower end of what the UFC does now, but not completely. It's not going to be like 85,000 buys, anything like that.
I'd say around 200. I think I don't know that Bobby Knuckles, Robert Whittaker, I mean, at this point, it's kind of been shown so far that he has struggled to draw pay-per-view buys. But I think Anderson Silva's name.
Nor is he trying, by the way. Nor is he trying.
Yeah, very fair, very fair. But I do feel like Anderson Silva's name and maybe a little bit of hype around Israel will do enough to get it to 200. That being said, man, 12 of the 24 fighters on this card do not even have Wikipedia pages.
Holy shit, is that right?
That's correct. 50%. 50%
wow.
of the card. That's rough.
Wow.
That's rough. So I can understand if this is one of fans, any of you guys skip out there as fans, because you are asked to pay a lot of money to be a fan of mixed martial arts, and this one is lacking in some respects. The top 2 fights, though, and especially the top 1 for me in particular, is just so fascinating. And we didn't get asked about that later on in the show, so let's talk briefly about this main event now: Robert Whittaker versus Kelvin Gastelum. Man, this is a fascinating fight to me, man. Like what's most interesting to me, I mean, because obviously at this point, Bobby Knuckles is probably the most underrated champion in all of MMA. I don't even think the UFC, just all of MMA in general. The resume that guy has put together over the course of his run at middleweight came out of nowhere, and it is crazy to me that if you just even look back a couple years ago, how long were we talking about the big 4 at 185? of Chris Weidman, Luke Rockhold, Jacare, and Yoel Romero. That was
Mhm.
the whole conversation for 185 for so long. And then out of nowhere, this middleweight or this welterweight who wins the Ultimate Fighter just comes up to middleweight and just starts wrecking all of these people. He beats Jacare, beats Romero twice, which might be one of the most impressive things I've ever seen, especially the way he did it, getting injured early in the fight, hurting his knee and just not caring. But on the other side, man, because I haven't noticed anybody really picking Kelvin Gastelum. And that feels fitting to me in a way, because I feel like this is somewhat of like a theme for him throughout his career. He has always been the guy that defies expectations, the guy that no one is picking, even from the very beginning of his UFC career, when he is the last pick on the Ultimate Fighter 17 of Team Sonnen. From the very beginning, people have been doubting him. He was supposed to be a welterweight. He wasn't supposed to be successful at middleweight. All of a sudden, he's in this middleweight title shot. I don't even understand how he ended up getting here. It's so impressive what he's done. It's a fascinating matchup to me. I mean, just what do you, when you look at this fight, are you excited by it? What do you think about this?
Oh, I mean, I'm extremely excited by it. And again, with Whittaker and Gastelum, they're not going to do a whole lot of talking outside the cage. They really never have. And Whittaker is like almost vehemently against trying to promote the fight in that way. He is like, he's a true professional athlete. He's not a prize fighter. He's not a guy that's going to talk any kind of crap to try to promote the fight. He's just a straight athlete, and that's all he wants to be, and that's fine. So once they get into the cage, though, I am all in on this fight 100%, because for those reasons that you listed, because it is a great story about two guys that were kind of written off, two guys that came from the Ultimate Fighter, which is not supposed to be any good anymore and not supposed to produce championship level fighters, at least at this point in 2019. And Whittaker is a guy that there's no holes in his game. He is a truly complete fighter that I think people don't or have not recognized in the past, because this is a guy that we know about his striking. He is a fantastic boxer. He is an incredibly good kickboxer. He messed up Jacare Souza, which is a very hard thing to do. Very durable dude. He also has great wrestling. I think people don't realize that. He was going to be in the Commonwealth Games last year in Australia.
Yep.
And he actually, the UFC pulled the plug on him. He was going to compete. He won like the qualifier to get into the Commonwealth Games in wrestling. And the UFC said, we don't want you doing that. We don't want you competing in that. And he had to pull out. He is also a high-level wrestler, which people don't really know about him. So there's no holes in his game. He went, it's also probably the best thing about this guy. His durability is stupid. He went 10 rounds with Yoel Romero, took the best shots that Yoel Romero, that absolute monster, dished out. Took the best shots and came back and won both of those fights. I mean, the man has an ungodly chin. He's got superhuman durability. And by the way, he's ridiculously skilled. So for all those reasons above, Robert Whittaker is incredible. And I'll always watch his fights, even if he doesn't want to promote them at media days and so forth and so on.
Yeah. Well, hey, real quick, let's make a pick, because we're not going to be on site for this one doing a preview show. So I think I'm going to have to go Bobby Knuckles, man. I don't know. You laid it out perfectly. He is so obscenely well-rounded. I don't know if there is an area where Kelvin Gastelum is better than him, except maybe power, and that might be it. And even that, I'm not so sure. I mean, Robert Whittaker can hit, man. He can crack. So I just have to say,
I'm going Romero, and Whittaker ate those shots.
Yeah, I'm going Bobby Knuckles, but man, again, as I said, this is the theme of Kelvin Gastelum's career, of just always upsetting these expectations and doing things that nobody expects. So I wouldn't be surprised if he wins, but I've got to go Bobby Knuckles.
Yeah, I'm gonna pick Whittaker. I think it'll be a decision though. I think Gastelum hangs around, probably wins a round or two. I think Gastelum is also extremely well-rounded and excellent, and he's got great power. He's got like a really tricky southpaw boxing game that is fun to watch. It's a great fight. I mean, on paper, it's just a tremendous fight. I think the whole main card actually it isn't the sexiest in terms of names outside of the top two, but I think the whole main card could be a lot of fun.
Yeah, we will see. In the meantime, let us keep going. Let us continue this train, and let's talk a little bit about this past weekend, man. We got several questions in a row about some UFC Fortaleza, and it starts on a good note. Coming from the infamous 05, he asked about Marc's jealousies. He writes, Marc, my man, be honest. On a scale of 1 to 10, how jealous were you of the cut man Tate when my boy Johnny Walker was showing off his rather sexual dances in front of him before he entered the cage? Candor is appreciated. So good Lord, Marc. Johnny Walker comes out there. He basically does a stripper entrance for a Magic Mike entrance into this arena. And then he just straight drops Justin Ledet in 15 seconds with a spinning spinning back fist. He almost soccer kicks him. I don't know what the hell he was doing. And then he just starts dancing all across this arena, doing worms and backflips and all sorts of crazy things. Johnny Walker, man, what the hell?
My God, what a man. What an absolute man. If you could just bottle Johnny Walker. Oh, wait, you actually can bottle Johnny. Anyway, the gyrations were phenomenal. I wouldn't say I was jealous of Tate because, look, it's not.
Tate could not get out of there fast enough. Tate could not get out of there fast enough.
I would probably be in. It was definitely awkward, but from an entertainment point of view, like from watching at home, so entertaining. I mean, the guy is just he's so charismatic. He is one of the most charismatic guys in the UFC, and he doubles up on that by being a ridiculously effective, exciting fighter. And just a lunatic. He's a wild man. He almost soccer kicked Justin Ledet. I can't even get the words out. I'm probably thinking about the gyrations. It's just, I mean, the guy is, whenever that guy is on the screen, he's magnetic. You know, you wanna watch that guy when he's on the screen. I think he could be a superstar. It's crazy. It's crazy. I love that guy. One of my new favorite fighters to watch. He threw a crazy spinning, like a spinning kick, a flying kick, and in pretty much one motion whirled around and knocked out Justin Ledet with a spinning back fist, and then almost kicked his head off with a freaking soccer kick. I mean, in 15 seconds.
It wasn't even a soccer kick. It was like a charging soccer kick. Like he had momentum of sprinting behind it. He would have
murdered that man if he landed that.
Even that spinning back fist, that was just kind of like his forearm almost. Like, I don't understand what I just watched when that happened, man. And I think he's a fascinating case study, right? Because someone said this, and I want to credit them because I don't want to just steal it from them. I think it was maybe Chad Duddes and Ben Folks on the Co-Main Event podcast, which is always fantastic. But I think they were asking, is this like, would we be talking about Johnny Walker in this way if he was a lightweight or a featherweight or just some random weight class like that where they're so deep? I think that maybe we would, but not nearly to this extent. And I think this is a perfect representation of sort of how starved we are for this sort of thing at light heavyweight and heavyweight. Those two weight classes, man. He very quickly at some point this year, he probably is going to get a top 10, top 5 fight if he just keeps up this pace, just because there are not enough people there. There are not enough young up and comers. And he stands out so much. He has so much personality. He can already speak excellent English too. I mean, pretty good English so far.
So
what's that?
He lives in the UK.
Yeah. His story is fascinating too. Guilherme Cruz, our own Guilherme Cruz, for his debut had a really interesting feature about just sort of the trials and tribulations that he's gone through and how he didn't have any money even for his UFC debut, and he sort of just he didn't really have anywhere to train. And now all of a sudden he's this guy that we're talking about in this way. My worry with him is we haven't seen a lot from him, man. He's still very new, very raw. It's super within realm that you throw this guy into the deep water way too soon, because the top couple at light heavyweight, even like the top 4 probably, there is such a big gap between those guys and the rest of the division. Like you can feast on the lower ranks, but as soon as you get to that upper echelon, you're just there and you got to deal with it. And I don't know. I don't want to see a guy like this, a personality like this, rushed into it too soon.
Yeah. And I like this comeback of the light heavyweight division. Are some names, some young names there that are very intriguing that could kind of make up the top 5 and top 10 of that division for a long time. He's one of those guys. I would love to see Johnny Walker up against someone like a Jean Vellante next, or a Patrick Cummins,
Yeah,
or I mean, even the winner of the fight on Saturday between Jimmy Crute and Sam Alvey, someone like that. Just guys who have been around the middleweight division for a bit. You don't want to go too fast with him, but and you want him to continue to have these exciting performances. And you also don't want to bury him. You got him in the right spots as far as pay-per-views or maybe even big ESPN. Maybe he fights on big ESPN next, although I can probably see him on that big show in Curitiba in May. But yeah, I mean, don't go too fast, but he may not give you a choice, because that division does have, although it does have guys like Dominic Reyes who are making their move up, and Ian Cutelaba. I mean, it's still a division that has a lot of upward mobility if you finish a few guys in a row like Johnny Walker has, and to do it the way he has. I mean, look, again, whenever that guy is around, I want to watch him. Like, if you tell me Johnny Walker is fighting next month, I'm watching that fight. Okay, granted, it is my job and I have to do it. But even if it wasn't, he would be a guy that I want to watch, gyrations aside.
Yeah, I just don't want to see him be ruined too early, because he's not an Anthony Smith or a Thiago Santos, a guy who has been around for a long time, been through sort of the gauntlet, and maybe brand new to this division, but not brand new as a whole. He is brand new as a whole. Like, he is still very young in his development. And only until just basically within the past couple months did he even have proper training situation and just like an ability to really start blossoming as a fighter. So I just don't want to see him rush too soon. But you're right, man. That light heavyweight division is starting to become really interesting all of a sudden with all these young up and coming guys. You got him, Dominic Reyes, Alexander Rakic. I'm sure I'm missing some. You got Thiago Santos, Anthony Smith as well. I'm sure I'm missing a couple. It's an interesting division all of a sudden, where maybe a year or two ago we didn't think we would have a lot coming up through the pipe, and now all of a sudden it feels as though we're going to have new names to start filling out those ranks.
Man, 1 year ago at 205, it was like it was barren. It was a freaking wasteland. And now there are all these interesting names coming up, and I'm into it. I think that, look, that was always the premier division in the UFC. When the UFC was at one of its heights, 205 was the division. Chuck Liddell, Tito Ortiz, Randy Couture, Shogun. That was the division. And I don't know if it'll get back there, but this is probably the best chance since then. It feels like Jon Jones kind of mowed all those guys, Rampage, Rashad Evans. Jon Jones kind of mowed all those guys down, and he was the king for a long time, and there was no one that could really touch him. And that may still be the case, but now we have this young crop. And I asked Jones this in the press conference, and I don't think he liked my question that much, but about now, you're kind of like the veteran welcoming these young guys like you used to be. And I think he said, like, well, I still have a long, I'm still a young guy, something like that. But it is that's kind of the storyline of the division, where Jones kind of crushed all of the veterans and the older guys in the division at 23, 24, 25 years old. And now all of these young bucks are coming up to try to take his throne. It's very interesting.
Yeah. Let's keep it moving from UFC Fortaleza. Yeah. To me, this was the biggest story coming out of that event, but maybe that's just because I'm a Marc. This is the questions coming from the infamous 05, who asked about Jose Aldo. Yeah. Hey guys, Jose Aldo has already beaten the who's who at 145. If he proceeds to take out the new class of contenders, Zabit, Yair, Alexander, etc., whom do you match Max up with at 145? Edgar's already lost twice to Aldo. At some point, do you not match these guys up with Jose to protect their contendership, or would that be promotional malpractice? So I want to use this as a broader way to talk about what we saw from Jose Aldo and generally that 45 division on Saturday, man, because I mean, obviously I got a painting right there of the guy. I did a massive feature on him when he was going to fight Conor McGregor. So I'm a little close with that story, I guess. And I think I hold a certain level of nostalgia when it comes to Jose Aldo. I know we're supposed to be unbiased, but he has always been one of my favorite fighters. And it was just cool. It was just really cool to see him succeed in the way that he succeeded on Saturday. That was vintage. And now this is 2 fights in a row. We've seen vintage berserker Jose Aldo, just once he smells blood, just going at it like he did in the WEC. I feel like when he was UFC champion, we didn't see this a lot because he was so careful to not lose that title, because really the title meant everything to his legacy and his income and his earning potential, because he wasn't a star and the UFC wasn't pushing him as one. But now that he's back fighting these 3-round fights, it has been so fun to see the revival of Jose Aldo and just see the old Jose Aldo come out in ways that, like on Saturday, where it's just an explosion of violence. It's so crazy when every time I see his age, I have to like catch myself for a moment, because it doesn't make sense to me that he is like 32 years old, something like that. It doesn't make any sense to me. For me, it's just very cool to see what Jose Aldo is doing right now.
Oh yeah, I mean, if you didn't appreciate and enjoy Jose Aldo winning on Saturday, I don't think you're an MMA fan. I don't know how you can be an MMA fan, because he is legitimately one of the greatest of all time. He is in the top, I mean, in top 5 probably, without a doubt, in the top 10, top 7, I think you could probably say without a doubt. And he's still going and he's still finishing guys. Look, Moicano is really good. He's really good.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a guy that, talking to people at American Top Team, they believe that he is a future champion of featherweight, and he still might be, but he's not Jose Aldo. And even at this advanced age and this late in his career, Jose Aldo is still an absolute killer. I think you hit on the head, Shaun, not doing a 5-round fight. I think that we know, I mean, as good as Jose Aldo was, he always did have some cardio issues in the final round and a half or so of those 5-round fights. And I think when he's in a 3-round fight, he can put the pedal to the metal when there's a chance to finish someone, as we've seen in this fight against and also in the Jeremy Stephens finish. Those were wonderful and violent finishes by Aldo, the Aldo of old in many cases. So now what do you do? I guess the question is what do you do with him now? And what do you do with 145? Because he's already lost to Max Holloway twice. He's not going to get that 3rd shot. He's just not. And I think the solution is going to 155. I think that Aldo, unless there's a fun fight available at 145 that's eluding me right now, I think 155 is the next spot for him. I think there's still a chance that I think that I don't know about a title fight at 55 for him, but I think there's fights for him there that would be very interesting. One of them could be, and maybe this is crazy to think about, and maybe it's not plausible, but Conor McGregor on Saturday night tweeted that he wants to fight.
Not gonna happen. Not gonna happen.
Once in
it won't happen. I don't
think it will. I don't think it will. I don't think it will. But wouldn't it be really cool to see McGregor versus Aldo in Brazil at 155, the rematch in a big soccer stadium down there? I mean, I think that would be really cool. There's that fight in May, and I know that it is already kind of stacked. It looks like it's going to have Nunes versus Holm and Nunes versus Andrade for the strawweight title. But wouldn't it be cool, Shaun, if they were to put that together for the big soccer stadium? What is it, a 50,000 seat, 40-something thousand seat stadium down there in Curitiba? McGregor Aldo 2 down there would be absolutely incredible. That would be super cool if they could do it. I don't know if it'll come together. Probably won't, but just thinking about it kind of gives me goosebumps.
I would love to see it, man. I would love to see it. I think I was always of the mind that Jose Aldo deserved a rematch against Conor McGregor, just for the legacy that he had already built and what he had meant to that featherweight division. But it'll never happen. I mean, you know that, and I know that. Conor McGregor, there would never be any reason for Conor McGregor to agree to that, because that is such a massive part of Conor McGregor's legacy, that 13 seconds. There's nothing he could do unless he knocks him out in 12 seconds or 13 seconds again that would be able to top that, or to be able to even help or boost his legacy in any possible way with a rematch against Jose Aldo. And that's unfortunate, because I would like to see it. But that being said, I could not disagree with you more about what Jose should do next. I don't see a move to 55 helping him whatsoever, because that division is already so backlogged. There is already so much going on there. There's no chance that he fights for a 155 title within his time frame. I mean, he said basically this is his last year in the UFC, and I believe him. So at that point, he's just moving to 55 just to do a couple one-offs. To me, it is very cool to see him continue to prove that I'm still here, I'm still around, and y'all still got to go through me at 45. And with this Jeremy Stevens fight, now Moicano, who Renato Moicano's only other loss in this division in the UFC was against Brian Ortega, and he was winning that fight when he lost it. To see him beat these two guys back to back, I want to keep seeing this. I want to give him
Aldo to be just the gatekeeper at 145.
Yeah, he is an elite gatekeeper at that point, and whenever someone eventually would beat him, then that person would 100% earn a title shot and would 100% get some sort of massive boost into it. And even if not, Jose Aldo can continue to just keep knocking off these young guys, man. I think either Brian Ortega or Alexander Volkanovski is the perfect fight for him next. And Alexander Volkanovski is already calling for it. He was calling for it the minute that fight was done on Saturday. And Brian Ortega tweeted something as well about, hey, let's start these negotiations. If either of those guys want it, which it both seems like they do, I love that for Jose. Just keep giving him these hard contenders. See how much he has left in the tank. It feels like he still has a lot. For however long we want to see where we get to see him left, I want to see him keep just knocking off these dudes at 45. That's his division. He's the 45 GOAT. It feels to me like a move to 55 would just be flippant and pointless because he's not making any title. He's not in the title picture whatsoever.
I do agree, and we know how clogged up 55 is. We just spoke about it like 20 minutes ago. But part of me would still love to see Anthony Pettis versus Jose Aldo at 55. I mean, that's just as a fun fight. I do see what you're saying, and I think that in some ways, I think that Aldo versus Ortega makes a lot of sense because Ortega is probably not. He's not one win away from a title shot, probably. Right, because he just lost to Holloway. If he were to beat Jose Aldo, his stock immediately rises again to the point where you could foresee him fighting Holloway again in a few months or a year or so. If Aldo wins that fight again, Ortega is not that close to the title shot anyway, and you just have Aldo continue to be that gatekeeper in the division, and Or I mean, in the possibility that Holloway does move up in weight to 55, then maybe you get Aldo on another title fight. I mean, at 45, and he closes out as
man. He's only has this year left. Like it's just not feasible.
Well, we'll see. I mean, those things are Daniel Cormier should be retiring next month. That ain't gonna happen either. So those things change very quickly. And then if depending on how long Holloway wants to be out, you do Aldo versus Ortega, you do Edgar versus Volkanovski, and you have almost like a mini tournament there. Most likely the Edgar Volkanovski winner gets a title shot next, but you have options, and that could be a cool little thing at 45 to do.
See, I'd give Edgar already the title shot. I think if anything for legacy, he feels like he earns it. He earned it before and then kind of gave Brian Ortega the shot on short notice. But neither here nor there. To me, I agree with you. I think what you just said is right. The Ortega fight is right because those are the two contenders in that featherweight division that are the farthest away from another shot at Max Holloway just because they've already fought and lost to him. So in my mind, that is the fight to make. If it was up to me, I would make Aldo versus Ortega.
Yeah. All right. Let's move on to another one from the infamous 05. Moraes or Cejudo? Marlon Moraes has shown that he's absolutely the number one contender at 135. With that being said, how do you pick him to fight TJ over the guy that just stopped TJ in seconds? Who is more deserving of a shot at TJ's belt, Marlon or Henry? Again, with that deserve word. There's no such thing. Doesn't matter. What do you think, though? Who should be next? This is actually a really good question, and it's a tough one. It's really not an easy answer. Cejudo or Moraes, who gets the next 35 title shot?
To me, it feels pretty clear-cut at this point because I felt before this fight was even booked, I felt like Rafael Assunção 100% deserved a title shot. His record over the course of the past 6-7 years was basically spotless except for a loss to TJ Dillashaw. Unfortunately, he did not get it done on Saturday, so now we're in this situation. And to me, it feels as though it's very obvious that Marlon Moraes needs to fight TJ Dillashaw, and Henry Cejudo should fight Joseph Benavidez. Especially if you're trying to keep that flyweight division alive, I understand fully and 100% and can appreciate what Henry Cejudo wants to do in terms of going up to 35 and fighting TJ again and getting his shot to be a champ. But if your whole crusade was about keep flyweight alive, you got to defend that title at least once before you go back up and try to do it again against TJ. Joseph Benavidez is there. The story for him would be very cool for me. I mean, Joseph Benavidez was basically the guy they created this division for. And for him to finally come full circle and get another shot right as the division maybe is about to expire and maybe go out as maybe the last flyweight champion or something like that, that is a cool story that you can sell. So I think these guys got to defend their title against contenders. And Marlon Moraes 100% deserves the shot. The way that he has taken out his last few opponents, Aljamain Sterling, and then on Saturday, I'm sorry, I'm missing one in there in the middle too. Jimmy Rivera, right? Mm-hmm. Those are the three. The way he has taken them out in the first round, just so violently and so decisively, those are three guys that do not lose in that way whatsoever. And Marlon Moraes has after his a bumpy start to his UFC career, he has looked like the guy that we saw in World Series of Fighting, just wrecking fools. And I think him versus TJ is a fascinating style matchup. I want to see those champions defend against the contenders.
I will say that I agree with you. I don't think it's clear cut, and I can see the UFC still giving the shot to Cejudo. If they're really going to fold up that 125 division, they just may not want to do another title fight there. So they may just say, screw it. Cejudo has the win over Dillashaw. That gives him the right to challenge for the 135-pound title. And, I mean, you got a point. You know, certainly there's a point there. I definitely don't want Dillashaw fighting at 125 again. I know that he still wants that. I definitely don't want that because that screws up two divisions. But, yeah, I mean, in a perfect world, I completely agree with you. I think that it should be Dillashaw versus Moraes. And it should be Cejudo versus Benavidez because Benavidez also has a win over Cejudo. He's beaten him.
Recently.
He's beaten the champion.
Recently.
And he's been the guy knocking on the door at 125 forever. He's lost twice to Demetrius Johnson, but he's always remained consistently there as that top contender. And it would make sense. Like you said, that he was the guy when 125 was traded that they thought, all right, Benavidez is going to move down and he's gonna wreck shop and be the guy in that flyweight division. So it does make sense on both counts, and I do agree with you, but I just don't know. I don't know, man. They love these super fights. They love doing these champion versus champion. That's like the fad of the day of the last year plus. So we'll see.
Yeah, I don't know if it happens. I agree with you, but we will see. Next up's coming from the Empire 91. To end off this UFC Fortaleza little block that we have. He's talking about something very near and dear to my heart, pacing and start times. Hello, fellas. We had a great start time for the last UFC event down in Brazil, and we just heard that the Philly event will also start at a reasonable hour. Should we get used to this or proceed with cautious optimism? Also, what did you do with those extra hours on Saturday night and Sunday morning? Yeah, no, we can get used to this. I mean, I don't know if you guys have seen ESPN sort of released the event schedule, or maybe the UFC did. Someone did for all these ESPN Plus events. Dude, the start times for all of these are gorgeous. Some of them are earlier than we got on Saturday. It is. Mark, I mean, I'm sure you were in total agreement with me, but watching that event on Saturday and the pacing and just keeping it fight after fight, keep it going. Sure, there was some commercials, but if that event was on Fox Sports 1, we would have gotten, with all the stoppages on it, we would have gotten a first round stoppage and we would have waited 40 minutes for the next fight. And then we've done it again and again and again. The way that pacing worked, and when that main event started, it was 8:30 here. Actually, when it ended, it was around 8:30 here for me. That's like, I'm going to start crying. I was so overjoyed with happiness at that, man. I didn't realize, I mean, I definitely realized it at the time, but you don't know until after the fact when you experience something like this, how god awfully torturous those Fox Sports 1 pacing was, man. And there's just the way they laid out those cards. It made it a chore to watch what really is the best sport in the world, the most beautiful sport in the world. It made it a chore, which it's inexcusable, frankly, now that we're in this era where that's not a thing anymore. And I cannot wait to enjoy this sport again, man, to actually enjoy the broadcast, enjoy your time on Saturdays as opposed to just slogging through every week, just slogging through these 9-hour things.
That was the best fight night that I watched in a very long time. It was the most easily digestible because of the pacing. It kept the momentum from fight to fight. The fights were really good, and it just kept that momentum going where you're still kind of high off the last fight, and now the next one is starting and you get to enjoy it again instead of just sitting through 45 minutes of the same ads over and over and over again that you saw like on the early prelims. You're seeing them again on the main card, or you're seeing like you're seeing like
let's throw it back to the desk. Let's throw it back to the desk.
Throw it back to the desk, and the same promo video for the next pay-per-view card that you've already seen like 15 times on the same damn show. It was such a pleasure to watch, and maybe we're in the minority a little bit because maybe we have to watch everything. We have to watch all the fights from start to finish every weekend. So maybe fans don't realize it as much as we do because we have to do it. We're in front of the TV pretty much every Saturday night, almost every Saturday night all year long for UFC cards, but it was just a pleasure to watch. But as far as the extra hours go, man, I was still up late. Guilherme Cruz was in Brazil. He was filing videos. I was still up pretty late. I did get maybe a few extra hours of sleep than I normally would on a regular Saturday night, but and maybe I didn't sleep in as much on Sunday, so that was nice. But no, it was great. It was just a great show to watch. Man, the fights were exciting. The pacing was great. The start time was great. It was Charlton Hall wrote it on Monday morning. It was like a perfect show. It was a pleasure. It was really a pleasure to watch.
See, man, I was up late too with you doing the same stuff, but we would have been up. We would have been up so much later.
Oh yeah,
normally. So
like 3 hours later.
Yeah, like I was done with my stuff maybe around midnight for me, and I know we're in different time zones, but like that would have been 3 a.m. just like a couple months ago. And
that's right.
When you're doing that consistently for Fortaleza shows or Kansas City or Wichita or wherever, it sucks the joy out of the sport a little bit. So man, if this is the new normal, if this is what we can get used to,
all about it.
I could not be happier for it, man. That was, like you said, that was such an enjoyable experience to just sit back and enjoy this sport and enjoy that card, watch that card from beginning to end, and just have fun with it as opposed to just feel like you're slogging through it and it's a chore.
Yeah. All right. Moving on now. Back to the MMAfighting.com comments. Stonerhead, Amanda Nunes retirement. Hey guys, hope you're having. Come on, man. Know the difference between your and your. Anyway.
Oh, geez.
Hey guys, hope you're having.
This man. Wait, hold on. This man's trying to pay us a compliment, say something nice to us, and you're out here condemning him for his grammar.
Stonerhead, I would be having a better week if you knew the damn difference between your and your. Come on, man, get it together. Stonerhead,
I love you. Stonerhead, I love you right here.
Come on, Stonerhead. Put the freaking bong down, man, and get it right. All right. Amanda Nunes recently talked about retirement at only 30 years old and arguably proving to be the best female to ever step inside the octagon. Her earning potential has never been bigger. Do you guys think she is being serious, or is Amanda using the retirement tactic in negotiating a new, improved contract with the UFC?
No, man. It felt pretty genuine to me. I think she's being pretty serious. I mean, she is. We've talked about it a little bit earlier on this show, but at this point, what's left for her to accomplish other than just extending out sort of the records that she's built and the legacy that she's building? Because she's already beaten, like I said, every woman who held that title at 135 or 145 other than Holly Holm. If she beats Holly Holm, at that point, she's just going to start facing this procession of young up-and-comers with no big names. There wouldn't be very many big fights out there for her other than maybe a Cyborg rematch. At that point, I can understand if she just wants to walk away, support her partner Nina and Ansaroff, fellow UFC fighter, contender, and really just start making a family and a life out of it. I mean, she's made a lot of money over the last 3 years.
Yeah, I mean, look, I get it. This is a hard profession to have. It's a hard sport. You get punched in the head for a living, and I'm sure that she's taken damage over the years. They want to start a family. It's interesting because Nina Ansaroff has talked about retirement multiple times over the last 2 years, but she just keeps on winning her fights and moving up the division at 115. So that's probably not going to happen anytime soon. So maybe Nunes is the one who steps away and deals with a possible baby if they have a kid in the near future. I think that for Nunes, I think you're right. I think that there's the Holm fight, which could very well happen in May. She were to beat Holly Holm, if she were to get that Cyborg rematch and beat Cyborg again, there really is not a whole lot for her to do at that point. I mean, there are some other interesting names in the bantamweight division, but yeah,
but interesting to us, not interesting to the general public.
No, I mean, these are not names that are going to sell probably a pay-per-view like as a main event. I mean, I'm looking down the list. I mean, I see like Jermaine Durandamy. I mean, I think she's really good, but I don't know if the UFC is going to give her another title opportunity. I don't know if they will do that because of what she did with the featherweight title. Ketlin Vieira is a really good prospect from Brazil, who's a very good fighter, but not the most exciting in the world. Sarah Kaufman is still out there, and I know she's calling for getting back in the UFC, and she should be. She's one of the best 135ers in the world. She's top 10, right? And she's not in the UFC. She's the Invicta champion. She should be in the UFC, but there's not a lot of there isn't even a lot of like top prospects. Like we talk about how bad 205 has been as a division as far as depth, but there's this influx of prospects coming in. I don't see any of that at women's 135. It's really not a very good division right now.
Yeah, I agree with you, man. Let's keep it rolling. We got way too many questions to get to, and we're running out of time. So let's try to get to them as many as we can. This next one's coming from the MMA fighting page from ESTD.
Yes.
And this one, you enjoyed this one. He writes, Anderson Silva's unfair advantage. Marc, do you think that Anderson Silva will have an unfair advantage since he now has a titanium rod inserted into his leg? Remember that once the narcissist Lex Luger had that steel elbow inserted, he was knocking people out left and right. What say you, Marc Raimondi?
It was the forearm. It was the forearm.
What do you think? Yeah, unfair advantage?
I mean, this is not really a serious question, so I'm not really sure if I should answer it seriously. I mean, yeah, it's silly. It's fun. But I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if I saw that leg go upside Israel Adesanya's head on Saturday night. Would not be surprised. Maybe a front kick to the chin. I will say this, Shaun. I will say this in all seriousness. Being at Anderson Silva's gym day a few weeks ago, he does look like he's throwing that leg kick, the one that was broken, with a lot more confidence than he did in the first year or so since after that injury. It looks like it's maybe not 100%, but that was a very big part of his game, the leg kicks, and maybe in an actual fight he won't be as confident in throwing it, but it did look a lot better than it has. It's more of a mental thing. I think that it's strong enough to throw and possibly gives an unfair advantage considering that it's a titanium rod, but it's more of a mental thing with him. I think he's afraid to break it. We'll see. We'll see if he throws it a lot in the fight.
All right, so we got 3 more green questions, and we got a ton of Twitter questions. We got about 15 minutes. What do you want to do?
Yeah. Let's keep going.
All right.
Let's get through these quick. From Eat My Shorts, Shaun's next big writing piece. Hey, Shaun, I really enjoyed the long writing pieces with the great artwork you have previously done. The ones from both Jose Aldo and Nate Diaz were amazing. Just wondering if you happen to have another one of these in the works for the near future and who it might be on. Thanks for taking the time, guys, and keep up the good work. Thanks, Eat My Shorts. Thanks, Eat My Shorts. Shaun, comment?
Excellent username as always. We've talked about this a little bit on the show before, but we had the site went through a bit of a change last year when Ariel left. We kind of had to reshuffle a lot of responsibilities. So things had to change a little bit, and it was harder for me to do these big writing projects and commit all those time to them. I think hopefully soon we should be figuring out something, and I should be able to at least get back to doing those a little bit. In which case, I think there's 2 that I would love to do this year, one of which is already basically halfway done and would have been released last year if I hadn't gotten screwed with something happening at the last second. That was probably my favorite one I've ever done. Hopefully I can find a way to release that this year, find a reason to release that this year. And there's another one that I really want to do too. I won't say who, but there's another one of those same type of articles that I want to do on a certain UFC champion right now. So we will see. I would like to do at least 2 this year. So hold me to that. If I don't do 2 by the end of the year, come at me. Eat my shorts.
Don't actually eat your shorts though. You mean the guy's name.
Either or.
Okay. Nick Diesel. Actually, no, wait, I'm skipping one. From SVF YAAN. I don't know what that is, but hey. DC versus Stipe. Do you believe Stipe is entitled to a rematch, or should he take another fight first? What do you think?
So this is something that instigator Marc Raimondi brought into the conversation.
I don't know. I mean, come on.
I'm just kidding. But obviously, this started sort of with you. You spoke to Stipe recently. That article came out this week on MMA Fighting. And then Daniel Cormier had a response to that on Twitter yesterday, on Tuesday.
Certainly did.
Basically laying out 3 reasons why he's never going to fight Stipe again. And now we've talked about this in the past on this show. And at this point, I can't. I mean, UFC Phoenix is next week. Cain Velasquez is fighting Francis Ngannou. I wish Cain Velasquez was fighting Stipe Miocic, man. I really wish that was the fight that was booked. I understand why Stipe hasn't fought since he lost to Daniel Cormier. But at a certain point, if he's just going to keep staying out and he's not going to compete and he's just going to wait, I don't feel too bad for him. And I've said this before on this program too, where he did not do himself any favors when he was a champion with the way he handled just the promotional side of it, and also just not even that, but just like trying to even be engaged in interviews and things like that. He made it a chore always for whether it was the UFC who's trying to get something out of him or the media or something. When you do that and then you lose that title and then you don't find that you can't get that opportunity back, there's a reason, man. If he was a more I know fans like him, he's a fan favorite, but he doesn't sell whatsoever. And if he was somewhat of a draw, somewhat of a anything like that, and he had sort of a fan base behind him that was very vocal, he could get this shot again. He just doesn't, because he didn't want to do that at the time. So I don't feel bad for him. I really wish he would fight. I wish we would see Cain Velasquez versus Stipe Miocic.
Of course, that would be a great fight, and it would certainly make a lot of sense in the scope of the division. But I'm thinking more and more this might be the fight, DC versus Stipe too. I'm thinking more and more. First of all, that video, I'm not sure if you watched it, the one that Stipe's team had done, but it's a videographer named Aaron Mendez. Really, really well done, and got a glimpse of who Stipe is that we don't normally see when he's in front of the cameras and when he's talking to us. It was really good, and it really got me starting to think about that rematch and how interesting it would be. Now let's remember when Daniel Cormier was right after UFC 230, he had just beaten Derek Lewis. He pretty much laid out this plan, and part of it is already kind of tossed aside because he's not going to actually retire in March like he said he would. But he said all along, I'm going to fight Brock Lesnar. If Brock Lesnar can't fight, I'll fight Jon Jones. Doesn't seem like the Jon Jones is going to happen, at least in the foreseeable future, right? The first quarter plus second quarter of 2019. And then he said, if I'm not going to fight Brock Lesnar, if I'm not going to fight Jon Jones, I'll fight Stipe Miocic again. And it seems like that is now the path where we're going. It seems like that could be the rematch. I know what DC tweeted and everything, but I still feel like he's a man of his word. And I think that fight could very well happen in the first half of this year, that rematch. Who else is DC going to fight? We talked about this already, Shaun. Brock Lesnar is not in the picture, probably not until maybe never. I mean, maybe never. He may never come back to MMA. We have no idea. You can't wait around for Brock. Jon Jones is fighting Anthony Smith at 205, of course, for the title in March. What does he do after that? It's going to take him. It's going to take a lot of money, he said, for the UFC to get him to the heavyweight to fight DC. DC, I hope, will never fight at 205 again. I can't imagine he would. So DC is a heavyweight right now. Who makes sense for DC? Miocic kind of makes sense for DC, right? Am I wrong? Who else would you have DC fight if not for Stipe right now?
No, I mean, you're not wrong at all. Like, Stipe deserves the fight, but that goes back to what we were talking about with that word, deserves. It doesn't mean much in today's modern landscape of MMA, Brock Lesnar is still in the USADA testing pool, and ultimately, I think he's going to get that fight. It feels to me like there would be no reason for him to still be in that testing pool if he did not have intentions to eventually come back and take that fight. But other than that, man, I mean, I'm on the record. I would hope that the UFC would just open the bag, give Jon Jones the bag, open the treasure trove, just pay him as much money as they need to pay him to get him up to heavyweight, because that to me is the fight that I need to see more than any other. More than a Stipe rematch, more than Lesnar before DC retires. Those two at heavyweight for a trilogy fight, that to me is the fight. But I know I'm not in the majority there.
Yeah, let's take a few. The last green comment kind of overlaps with my promo a little bit, so let's kind of move on to Twitter, if you will. Do you have anything queued up? I have a lot of stuff, but a lot of it is kind of overlap.
I have not looked until right now. Let me look real quick.
Bill Steinmetz, I mean, I don't know how he does these gifts, man, but
he is the gift king. He is a gift king. They're fantastic.
Some of them are a little creepy, but mostly they're great.
You got one for me?
I'll ask this one from Josh Reyes. Along with the whole Jones picogram controversy came a lot of questions about USADA. My question for you guys, will the UFC be better off without USADA? It's really a tough question, and I think there's multiple schools of thought here. I would say no. My opinion is no. The UFC would not be better off with USADA, but I think that a little more consistency would be nice, and a little more transparency would be nice with USADA. I don't think going back to the dark ages where you're relying on commission testing is enough. I really don't. Look, these commissions don't have the kind of money and resources to do wide-scale testing like USADA does, like the UFC is paying USADA to do. So I still think that there is a need for a good doping program in the sport. The most important thing to me, and it doesn't seem like it will happen maybe ever, is a doping program that's actually collectively bargained, where the fighters actually all agree to this kind of testing and how the whole layout of what testing program looks like. Fighters, for the most part, want a doping program. I would say 90+% of fighters want there to be some kind of doping rules and drug testing in the UFC. But when the UFC hired USADA to do the testing and to do the adjudication, it was unilateral. The fighters had absolutely no say in anything that was involved. So I think that the ideal scenario would be a collectively bargained doping program, which is not what it is now. And what it is now is, stuff like Jon Jones, where a lot of fighters are very upset about the Jon Jones stuff. And whether or not you believe what the science and scientists are saying, it does seem like there are some inconsistencies with how USADA has handled that. So I understand why some fighters are upset, but I don't think that means you just get rid of USADA. I think you can improve upon it, but you don't just cast it aside.
Yeah, I think that was well said. I ultimately would not want the UFC to have no drug testing program, which is what they would have if they got rid of USADA. So,
correct.
It feels like a necessary evil at this point, even though there is a lot of problems with it that we have discussed in the past. Let's hit one from the gift king himself, Bill Steinmetz. He wants to know, now that the Fox deal has been laid to rest, should the UFC implement a new ranking structure to enhance its meaningfulness? How would you structure things? Thanks, gents. # best team in the biz. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. So that's an interesting question, because way back in the day when the Fox deal started, the ranking system came in because Fox wanted something that casuals could see and easily understand when it came to, if someone has a 4 next to their name as opposed to the 8, then that guy's the higher ranked guy. They should probably win. Now that this is on ESPN, I don't know that that's any different. I'm sure ESPN would like the ranking structure. But it's obvious that the ranking structure is beyond flawed and broken at this point. It is a panel of media members that don't actually seem to cover the sport on a consistent basis. I would like to see them do away entirely with the media generated rankings. My idea would never happen. What I would prefer would never happen. But ultimately, if it was up to me and you just said you can have whatever you want, Shaun, I would like to see the UFC's own internal rankings be the ranking system, man. I would love to see Sean Shelby and Mick Maynard put out new rankings every week with the results of the fights and where they feel the fighters are in the division, it would obviously create some level of controversy just within the fighter community of you think I'm there when I should be there. And so it's one reason they would never do it. But I just think they would never, ever do it. But I would personally find it fascinating.
Oh yeah, of course, that would be really fascinating. The current system is complete trash. We know that. It's hot garbage. It's awful. It is. I mean, I think I've maybe heard of one or two of these people who vote on the rankings. This is my job. I cover MMA for a living. I've been doing it for about 6 years, and I've only heard of 2 of these people. This is my full-time job. Whatever. Anyway, it's completely silly to think that I've only heard of maybe 2 of those people who vote on the rankings. Honestly, I don't know what the best way is, because in reality, this is what the rankings are. They're just for marketing purposes. They're for promotional purposes. They're not real rankings. They're just a number next to a name that you can show on a TV screen that gives some kind of context to what this fight is and who these fighters are. That's really all it is. It's all it's ever been. There was never the intention for the UFC to make these the real rankings.
Also, though, when it suits them and when it's beneficial, it is also used in negotiations for contracts.
That's right. But only when it's beneficial. When it's beneficial to the athlete, then they just say they're just, the media rankings. And it's kind of a cool way for the UFC to wash their hands of those rankings when it becomes inconvenient for them. They can just say, oh, the media is voting on them. We don't even, kind of like what we're saying now. But honestly, do it by algorithm, baby. Get an algorithm together like the BCS. Do it all math. Do it by wins and losses and strength of schedule, and do it somehow that finishes and whatnot. There's got to be a way. There's got to be some mathematician somewhere. Endeavor has a ton of money that they can hire to come up with an algorithm. And look, and that'll also be controversial, like the BCS is controversial in college football. But at least you can say, all right, it's the math. The math is putting it that way. It's not media generated or Sean Shelby and McMahon generated. That would be kind of cool.
Yeah, that's a great point. But it would be interesting to see it in action. I don't know how you can quantify a lot of stuff in MMA. But hey,
it's very hard to quantify, but it'll be fun. It'll be fun to see. It'll be fun to watch.
Yeah. You want to do one more and then we'll hit the promos?
Sure.
All right. Let's take this one from Michael Kondratiuk. And I know I just butchered your last name, so I'm so sorry, Michael.
That's the guy that had a landmine for me a few weeks ago.
He wants to know, if Cyborg leaves, will the 145-pound division go away? And if so, what happens to Megan Anderson? Can she make 135, or will she have no choice but to leave? She 100% cannot make 135. She is a very large woman.
Megan Anderson can make 135 if she cuts off one of her legs.
Yeah.
That's it.
So her fate kind of hangs in the balance of all of this, man, because it's no secret that Cyborg wants that Amanda Nunes rematch, and that she is nearing the end of her contract, and that if Amanda Nunes is not going to defend that 145-pound title, I don't know if there is a future at 145 in this division. I mean, they even did a tough season, and the tough winner went down to 135. So Megan Anderson could be out of a job if they get rid of that division, because she cannot go down.
And that really sucks, because Megan Anderson is a great fighter. She's a great personality. She has so much potential to do big things in this sport, but it's just unfortunate. It's not her fault. It's just unlucky that she's in that division and she has nowhere else to go. I mean, she could possibly find a home in Bellator at some point if they're really going to do that. I'm curious to see what they'll do with her, because
I think she would kill in Bellator. I think she would do very well in Bellator.
She'd be great. She'd be able to promote herself the way that she likes to do. But yeah, right now it doesn't seem like there's a bright future for 145 at all, and it's unfortunate. The UFC really never committed to it. And look, I don't think there is a huge amount of talent there. But anytime the UFC does actually commit to a division, people come out of the woodwork and they see if there's actually a path in that division. And they haven't done that with 145. It was always kind of just, hey, look, we're just gonna bring in ladies for Cyborg to fight. And
I mean, how long has that division existed at this point for the UFC?
Cyborg came into the UFC in 2017, right?
I think she came in 2016 and then maybe fought in 2017 at 145 because they were making her do those 40 fights.
Oh yeah. Okay, so yes, correct.
Dude, it's 2019. It's 2019, and there still isn't even a rankings for featherweight. There isn't even Amanda Nunes atop some sort of featherweight division. It's just for her bantamweight picture, she just has 2 belts. Like, it's obvious they have not committed to this whatsoever.
No, they have not, and really, the future lies with Cyborg. If they do sign her again, she has 1 fight left, and I believe her contract is expiring also early this year. If they re-sign her, then there's a future at 145. It really is contingent upon her, but and I don't think the UFC wants her to walk either. As much as they don't really want to give her a division, they don't want her to go to Bellator because Cyborg on cable pulls in big numbers. She does. Cyborg headlining a Paramount fight does big Paramount Network fight does big numbers. So I wish the best for Megan Anderson. I really feel for her because she's tried so hard to promote herself and she really gets it. I would love to see her in professional wrestling. I've told her this. I think that she would be great in WWE. I really do. If this doesn't work out, if there's no financial thing for her, I think that she'd be fantastic in pro wrestling.
Yeah, she's a really engaging interview. Like, she's a very good personality.
Did you see her? She did the in-cage interviews for Invicta recently, for Invicta's last card, and she was fantastic. I mean, she took to it right away. I mean, she was really good on the mic, and I think she has a bright future in whatever she decides to do. But it just seems like if that is at 145 fighting in the UFC, it just doesn't seem like there's just not much there right now.
Well, Marc Raimondi, you just gave me an excellent segue to my promo. We're running out of time here. Let's go ahead and seg into these promos. And you just set me up perfectly. Speaking of might work. So
You're welcome.
I will go first on this one. So speaking of might work, we talked about it a little bit today, but UFC Fortaleza was somewhat of an interesting first step into what really, I think the nitty gritty of this UFC ESPN deal is going to look like. The first show, the Brooklyn show, was obviously a big spectacular blowout. These Fortaleza shows are what we should come to expect, though. And there's a lot of newness. There's a lot of trying things out, but one new addition above all else that seemed to actually like split opinions, I think, on social media, but was actually an addition that I actually rather enjoyed, was the addition of none other than the Count himself, Michael Bisping, to the color commentary booth. Now, Marc, we talked about this a bit last year during the Contender Series run, but I have actually really always enjoyed hearing Mike on the broadcast booth on the call. He's still very much a work in progress. But to me, he feels similar to a Daniel Cormier, and I feel like Daniel's the best in the sport at this, color commentary. For me, in a way that the same way that Daniel brings a lot of levity and fun to the gig, while also kind of knowing his stuff and understanding when to switch into that serious moment when the moment calls for it. And Mike feels to me very similar. Like, he's able to bring levity and fun to the call, but also knows enough about all of this, obviously, as a former champion who was in this forever, to be able to talk somebody through techniques or switch into that serious mode. Now, Fortaleza was the first time he was doing a UFC show proper, and I really thought he acquitted himself well, man. Like, I know some people on social media weren't fans of it. It seemed very split, and admittedly, his post-fight interviews need a lot of work. But Marc, I mean, you and I have done similar type of stand-up interviews. Like, that's a very different and bizarre skill set, I think, from the one Mike is used to. So I'm sure he'll improve with that over time. But altogether, I think his debut was a big success, and it actually got me thinking about something, which is what I guess the broader point of this. I find it's relatively incredible how many fighters in MMA have seamlessly made that jump to commentary work over the last few years. Because if you think about it, it's actually a really large number. And I know you see that occasionally in other sports, but it's definitely not something you see with the level of frequency and I think like a hit rate, like a success rate that we seem to see in MMA, because for every Chris Collinsworth or Tony Romo out there are a billion different examples of former athletes who were just terrible at it, the Jason Wittens of the world. And I wonder why it is with MMA that it seems like it always kind of works out for the most part. Like, there are obviously bad examples in the past, but over the last several years, there have been way more good examples than bad of fighters making this transition. What is it about mixed martial arts and the culture and this community that makes this transition so seamless for so many fighters? I wonder, maybe it's the culture itself, right? Because cutting interviews in a compelling way is a lot more important for your average up-and-coming UFC fighter than it is for, say, the center for the Boston Celtics or whoever. because of that, I think a lot of successful fighters who manage to stick around, the guys who become the veterans who understand this game, they become much more adept inherently at speaking from the heart and saying what's truly on their mind than many of the athletes in the big four sports, most of whom have gone through some level of PR training since they were in college. Because, I mean, I got my start in basketball years ago on a basketball beat, and interviews in the NBA are mostly terrible, man. Mostly lined with every cliche in the book, and that just doesn't fly as well as with MMA. But I also think that I want to, because we criticize the UFC a lot on this show, but I want to give credit where credit is due. I think the UFC has done something really smart as well, because they are using the Contender Series as sort of a training ground now for commentators. And it's really kind of brilliant because it's a low stakes, low pressure way to give guys like Mike Bisping and Paul Felder before him these real reps, the kind of reps they need to find their sea legs before throwing them into the deep end of the pool. So, hey, I hope this trend continues, man. It certainly looks like it will. The UFC already has, in my opinion, the deepest bench of commentators of any major sport entity that I can think of. And if Saturday was any indication, Michael Bisping is one more worthy addition to that lineup. I hope we see more of him moving forward.
Well said. I too am a fan of Bisping. I think he's just an incredibly entertaining guy.
He's fun. General. He's very fun.
He makes me laugh. He's a funny guy. So yeah, my promo, Shaun, is kind of based on I had a conversation last week, I guess about a week and a half ago, I guess at this point, or 2 weeks ago. No, it was last week. I'm sorry, I'm all over the place. I had a conversation. I had a sit down interview last week with Rizin president Nobuyuki Sakakibara. And it was a really interesting 30-minute interview. It's up on MMAfighting.com right now, up on the MMA Fighting YouTube. And he has some really interesting ideas about MMA and ideas that I'm not necessarily against. I think they're very intriguing. And one of those ideas, basically what he was saying through translator and Rizin executive Shingo Kashiwagi, was he wants a year-end, a season-end climax for the entire sport of MMA. And he thinks that the UFC should initiate this season-end climax for the sport every year. And it would be kind of like a tournament of champions or a champion versus champion from other organizations type of thing. And it would just be once a year. And every organization from the UFC to Bellator to Rizin to ONE to KSW to PFL, on and on and on. Invicta would have representatives in this year-end thing. And he said that he feels like MMA is stale right now and it's oversaturated and it needs a reboot. And these are really interesting ideas. And I don't know if this will ever happen. It probably will never. But wouldn't it be interesting, Shaun, if you had champion versus champion matchups, inter-organizational matchups, like Daniel Cormier versus Ryan Bader? We would finally get that fight that the UFC did not put together in 2015. Bader's been on a tear. Would be a really cool fight, UFC champion versus Bellator champion. How about, and Sakakibara said he would do this, how about the rematch, Kyoji Horiguchi versus Demetrius Johnson? Would that not be cool to see that in 2019 or 2020, to see that rematch, the Rizin champion against the guy that beat him in the UFC, Demetrius Johnson, who's now with ONE? Or how about Gegard Mousasi versus Robert Whittaker, or a Rory McDonald versus Tyron Woodley rematch? I mean, there are so many possibilities. He did Dillashaw versus Darian Caldwell, Jon Jones versus Ryan Bader, Angela Lee versus Rose Namajunas, Max Holloway versus Pitbull. I mean, excuse me, it's nothing to cough about. I think it's a cool idea. I don't think it will ever happen, but I implore people to go to check out that interview with him and see the way that he thinks about MMA. It's very different than I think American promoters think about MMA. Outside of maybe Scott Coker, who's kind of willing to do these interpromotional things. King Mo is going over there to fight. It seems like Kyoji Horiguchi is going to come to the United States this year and fight for Bellator, which would be really cool to see him against Caldwell, possibly in a rematch of their Ryzen fight. I think these are all cool things, and I don't think it would harm anyone if once a year there was a card like that where everyone came together for like the World Cup or Super Bowl of mixed martial arts.
That would be cool. That would be cool.
Cool, man. I mean, I think that would be. I mean, I think fans would love that. That would do big numbers, I think, on pay-per-view. Now, how they divvy that money up, I don't know.
It'll never happen. It would never.
It'll never happen. The UFC would never agree to that. They just don't. They don't play well with others. But
also, they would have nothing to gain. They would have nothing to gain and everything to lose.
Nothing to gain. No, they make a ton of money already.
Well, hey. Well said, Mark. That was you guys should definitely check out that interview with Saki Kabara. That was very interesting stuff. Good stuff on that. And with that, this is probably our longest show to date that we've done. We ran a little long, but you guys really brought it with some amazing questions today. So we felt like we had to get to everything. Apologies to those on Twitter who we missed. We'll definitely try to get you guys next time. But hey, in the meantime, this has been another episode of the A-Side Live Chat Podcast. Thank you so much for listening to us. UFC 234 is this week. We're going to have all sorts of goodies coming from that. Next week is a big one, UFC Phoenix. That's the first show on ESPN. That will be here in my hometown. So we haven't figured out the media schedule for that yet. We might need to do a Tuesday show, but we're going to try to make it Wednesday, but we'll definitely let you guys know. But hey, in the meantime, thank you so much for watching. This has been another episode of the A-Side Podcast. Mark has one thing he wants to say. What's up, Mark?
Just worth noting about UFC 234, Esther Lynn and Casey Leiden, our video and photo team, the duo, they're in Melbourne. They're on the ground. They're producing videos and content and photos all week. So stay posted to MMA Fighting for all of that coverage.
Yes, like I said, we're going to have lots of goodies coming from that event. It should be an interesting one. In the meantime, thank you so much, guys. We appreciate all of you. We love you all. We will see you next week on the A-Side Live Chat Podcast. Enjoy the fights.